My brother didn't bring me to his partnership dinner as his sister, he brought me as evidence that ambition is not genetic. I found out about the event, the way I find out about most things in my family, late, and by accident. My mother called on a Tuesday to ask if I owned anything that wasn't gray. I said I owned several things that weren't gray. She said, "Good, because your brother's dinner is Saturday, and I already told people you'd be there, so please don't make this strange." That was the invitation. No date, no venue, no please. Just the assumption that I would show up and the instruction not to embarrass anyone. My name is Maya. I'm 30 years old and I work in water infrastructure data systems. I build and maintain the digital monitoring networks that track pressure, flow, and failure risk across municipal water grids. When a city's pipes start whispering about collapse, I'm the person who reads the whisper. I don't have a glamorous title. I don't speak at conferences. I work from a home office with 2 monitors, a cold cup of coffee that I forget about every single morning, and the particular satisfaction of understanding a system that most people never think about until it stops working. My family doesn't understand what I do. My mother once told her book club I was in computers. My father introduced me to his golf partner as the one who works from home. My brother Ryan has never asked me a single question about my work in the 4 years I've been doing it. Not one. Ryan is the one they understand. 35, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who knows how to enter a room. He's a project manager now, a partner at Callaway Meridian, a large civil engineering and construction contracting firm. They build things. Bridges, highways, water treatment upgrades, pipe replacements for cities that can't afford to replace their own infrastructure. Ryan shakes hands with mayors. He golfs with city council members. He has a wife named Stephanie who is very pretty and very good at laughing at the right moments. My parents have been orbiting him for years, like he's a small, warm sun, and they've forgotten there are other planets. The dinner was at a venue in the financial district. Marble floors, low lighting, the kind of place where the menus have no prices, because if you're asking, you were invited by mistake. Callaway Meridian was celebrating Ryan's elevation to partner, and several of the firm's major clients had been invited. I was told to be there at 7. I arrived at 7, and my mother looked at my dress, and then at my shoes, and then back at my face, like she was doing triage. "You look fine," she said, which in her language means, "You look acceptable, and I've already lowered my expectations." My father squeezed my shoulder in a way that felt less like affection and more like a signal to stay close to the perimeter. Ryan found me 5 minutes later, near the bar, and I could see him calibrating, not calculating whether to be unkind, calculating how to manage me with the minimum amount of effort. "You made it," he said. "You invited me," I replied. He smiled the way he smiles when he wants to look generous. "Listen," he said. "There are some serious people here tonight. Weston's people, city folks, some investors. Just..." He paused. "Keep it surface level, okay? Nobody needs to hear about pipes and software." I looked at him. "I'm talking about my job, not performing surgery," I said. He patted my arm. "Just be normal, Maya." I wanted to ask him what normal looked like when your family has spent a decade making you feel like a rough draft of a person. But I didn't. I took my drink and found the seat with my name card, which was at a table near the kitchen corridor, partially behind a tall floral arrangement, next to a couple I had never met, who spent the entire first course talking to each other, and never once turned in my direction. I sat there and I thought about leaving. I thought about it seriously and specifically. I pictured the drive home, the quiet, the blue light of my monitor, the problem I'd been working on all week, a pressure anomaly in the eastern grid of a water system 2 states over that kept showing up in the overnight reports and disappearing by morning. I thought about that anomaly the way you think about something that's waiting for you, something real. Instead, I stayed. Because I always stay. Because leaving would have become a story my mother told for 3 years. The dinner moved in waves. Toasts were made. Ryan stood and spoke about vision and legacy and the future of infrastructure, and he was good at it, the way he's always been good at performing competence. My mother watched him from across the room with an expression I had never once seen her use on me. Pure, uncomplicated pride. It lived on her face the way sunlight lives on a window. Constant, easy, assumed. I ate my salmon and watched the room. Then Ryan appeared at my shoulder again. Different energy this time. Brighter, more deliberate. He put his hand on the back of my chair and leaned down like we were close. "Come on," he said quietly. "There's someone I want you to meet." I set down my fork. "Now?" He was already straightening, already steering. His hand wrapped around my elbow, the way it used to when we were kids, and he wanted to show his friend something funny. We walked across the dining room toward a group of men near the windows. The city was lit up behind them, all glass and amber. The man at the center was in his early 60s, silver-haired, the lean kind of stillness that comes from a lifetime of making decisions that cost other people sleep. Gerald Weston. I'd heard his name. Everyone in my field had heard his name. He ran the Weston Infrastructure Group, one of the largest regional water authority investors on the East Coast. His signature was on contracts that touched half the municipal systems in the mid-Atlantic. Ryan moved us into the group with the easy confidence of a man presenting something he owns. "Gerald," he said, "I want you to meet someone." He gestured at me the way you gesture at an exhibit. "This is my little sister. She's always been the quiet one in the family. Works on computers, something with water. Honestly, I still can't explain it exactly." He laughed. "Kind of the odd one out, you know. Every family's got one." Laughter moved through the small group. Polite, brief. My mother, who had materialized beside me at some point I hadn't noticed, added, "We always joke that she lives inside her laptop. Doesn't come up for air much." My father chuckled. "She was never much for the spotlight." It hit me the way those things always hit me. Not like a slap, but like a door quietly closing. The specific sound of the people who raised you deciding, in front of strangers, what you are worth. I kept my face still. I had practice. Gerald Weston had been listening. He looked at me during the laughter the way a man looks at something he isn't sure he's seeing correctly. Not rude. Careful. His gaze moved from my brother to me and stopped. He said nothing for a moment. The group around him kept talking. He didn't. Then he asked, almost to himself, "What did you say your name was?" "Maya," I said. "Maya Caldwell." His expression shifted. It wasn't slow, the way realizations usually travel across a face. It was sudden. A door swinging open instead of closing. His chin lifted. Something behind his eyes went very still, and then very alert. He looked at my brother. He looked back at me. "Caldwell," he said quietly. "From the Vantage Utility Systems contract. 4 years ago, the air in the radius around us changed. Ryan's smile stayed on his face, but his eyes went uncertain, trying to read a room that had stopped following his script. I stared at Gerald Weston. My pulse was loud in my ears. I wasn't sure, in that moment, what was happening. I'd spent 4 years assuming no one remembered. Gerald's voice was low, almost private despite the people around us. The ice storm event. The pressure cascade on the Harmon grid. The rerouting protocol submitted through the help desk on a Saturday night. I swallowed. "That was you," he said. It wasn't a question. My mother's laugh came out wrong. "Oh, Maya does some little technical projects," she started. Gerald Weston turned to look at her, and something in the calm of his face made her stop mid-sentence. "The odd one out," he said, like he was testing the phrase to see how it sounded. He said it the way you repeat something that doesn't make sense in a language you speak fluently. The group had gone quiet. Ryan's smile had developed a fault line down the center. I stood there, in a dress my mother had approved of, at a table I'd been hidden behind, and I tried to understand how the last 4 years had just folded in on themselves. 4 years earlier, I was no one in the way that people with student debt and a junior contractor title are no one. I worked overnight shifts at a small utility software company called Vantage Systems. We handled monitoring software for municipal water networks, 3 states, maybe 40 cities. The kind of job where you learn everything about infrastructure and nothing about self-promotion. I was 26. I made just enough to keep my apartment and repay my loans at a pace that felt like trying to empty a lake with a cup. The ice storm hit in February. It came from the northwest, and it hit the Harmon grid, a mid-sized city water distribution network. 80,000 residential connections, aging pipe stock, a monitoring system that was already running on patched-together software from 2 generations ago. I was on overnight shift, coffee going cold, watching the dashboard, when the cascade started. Pressure readings in the eastern segment dropped and spiked in a pattern I had never seen in the data before, but recognized immediately the way you recognize a rhythm you've heard in your sleep. The system's automated alerts weren't catching it because the variation intervals fell just below the trigger thresholds. The algorithm was reading normal. The pipes were not. I called my supervisor. He didn't answer. I called the emergency line for Harmon's city water office. I was put on hold for 11 minutes. When someone picked up, I explained what I was seeing. They told me the automated system showed nothing unusual, and they'd have someone check in the morning. It was 2 in the morning. The temperature outside was 4 degrees. I hung up and I did what my brain does when a problem is real and no one is listening. I mapped it myself. I pulled up every pressure log from the past 18 months, every maintenance report I could access, every cross-reference between pipe age ratings and flow data. I built a model on my personal laptop while the work system ran in the background. It took me until 5 in the morning. The cascade wasn't random, it was the eastern distribution spine, a series of mid-diameter mains running under 3 residential neighborhoods. The pressure fluctuations were the signature of pipe walls under stress, expanding and contracting faster than they were rated for in cold weather. If the temperature dropped another 6 degrees by morning, which the forecast said it would, the stress fractures would propagate. The break wouldn't be 1 pipe, it would be 7, in sequence, inside 3 hours. I wrote a rerouting protocol. Close these valves, open these bypasses, drop system pressure across the eastern segment by 18%, redirect flow through the western trunk line. It wasn't elegant. Elegance wasn't the point. The point was 70,000 people waking up with water. I found a general inquiry email address in Weston Infrastructure Group's directory. They were the parent authority overseeing Harmon's water contract. I sent the protocol at 5:47 inches the morning with no greeting, no credentials, no explanation of who I was. Just the data model, the rerouting map, and a note that said, if the eastern spine isn't rerouted before 7 a.m., expect multiple simultaneous main breaks. This is not a prediction. This is in the numbers. I expected nothing. I got nothing. A month later, Vantage Systems lost the Harmon contract in a restructuring and I was laid off. I spent 2 weeks sending applications and telling myself the email had been deleted by someone whose inbox was already full. Apparently, it hadn't. Gerald Weston's assistant found me near the end of the evening, as the dinner was winding down and waitstaff were clearing the last of the dessert plates. She asked quietly if I could spare a few minutes. She said Mr. Weston would like to speak privately. We went to a small meeting room off the main hall. The door clicked shut. The music from the dining room became a murmur, like something that mattered less than it thought it did. Gerald sat across a small table. No assistant, no phone. His hands were folded in the way of a man who doesn't waste the beginning of a conversation. I owe you an apology and an explanation, he said. We couldn't trace the submission back to an individual. Vantage's help desk records listed it under a general contractor ID. When we tried to follow up, the company had already restructured. The trail ended. I sat with that for a moment. I'd spent 4 years believing the work had disappeared. It hadn't. It had just been walking around without my name on it. We implemented the protocol within 2 hours of receiving it, he continued. The temperature dropped to -2 by 7 that morning. The eastern spine held. We've since rebuilt the entire monitoring system using the detection logic from your model. It runs in 12 cities now. Something in my chest pulled tight. Not pride, exactly. More like the feeling of being told a thing you did mattered, after spending years living as if it didn't. He slid a document folder across the table. We've been experiencing anomalies in a current project, he said. Inconsistencies in materials, performance data from a pipe replacement contract, numbers that technically add up, but don't match what the field teams are reporting on the ground. He paused. I'd like an independent assessment. Someone outside my current vendor relationships. Someone who reads what the numbers are actually saying. I looked at the folder. It was thick and labeled with a project code. Underneath the code, visible at the top of the first sheet, was a contractor name, Callaway Meridian. My brother's firm. I drove home in silence that night with the folder on the passenger seat and the city lights sliding past the windows like they didn't know anything had shifted. I didn't open the folder until I was at my desk with a fresh cup of coffee, and the particular stillness that comes at midnight when everyone around you is asleep, and the truth is the only thing still awake. The data was methodical in the way that concealed wrongdoing always is. It had been designed to look operational. Pipe material grade certifications that matched the contract spec on paper, but the installation performance readings told a different story. Materials rated for 50-year load tolerance were failing pressure benchmarks at year 2 intervals. Not dramatically, not in ways that would trigger a city inspection. Just quietly, consistently, in the margins where auditors don't usually look. Cross-referencing against procurement records, the pattern clarified. The contract specified Class 52 ductile iron pipe for the primary distribution mains. What was actually being installed based on the pressure coefficient data, the weld performance logs, and the corrosion variance readings matched the profile of Class 50, 2 grades lower. Cheaper by roughly $38 per linear foot across a project that covered 11 miles of main line. The billing had gone out at Class 52 rates. I sat with the numbers for a long time. I wanted to find an alternative explanation. Measurement error, calibration drift, a data entry mistake multiplied across a large dataset. I went back through the records twice. The pattern didn't waver. It was too consistent to be accidental. Consistent error at this scale isn't error. It's a system. Approval signatures appeared throughout the documentation. Project manager on record for materials verification. Signed off at each phase. My brother's name was on every one. I made myself close the laptop and go to sleep. I didn't sleep. By the 3rd day, I had a complete picture. The material substitution was running across 2 contract phases. The financial spread between build spec and installed spec across the full project amounted to roughly $2.3 million. The routing of that spread was layered through 2 subcontractors whose company registrations shared a registered agent address with a holding entity that had been formed 6 months before the contract was awarded. Ryan called on day 4. I saw the name on my screen and set the phone face down and kept working. He called again that evening. This time I answered. "Hey," he said. "Just checking in. Hadn't heard from you since the dinner." I was quiet for a moment. "I'm working." Right. He paused. "So Weston. He seemed to like you. He mention anything about the Callaway project?" I looked at my screen. "I'm doing a review." The silence on his end was a different kind of silence than the one before it. "Yeah," he said carefully. "What kind of review?" "Independent assessment. Materials, performance data." Another pause. Longer this time, Maya. His voice had shifted. That careful warmth that meant control was coming. "Look, there's context to that project that the raw numbers won't show you. Procurement decisions are never clean. Supply chain realities, substitution protocols, it's complicated. You're not a contractor. You're not in the field. You might be reading things wrong." I kept my voice even. "Am I?" he exhaled. "I'm your brother." "I know," I said. "Then help me here. You look at data all day. You know how to frame a finding. You could write this up in a way that addresses the performance questions without he searched for the word, without making it bigger than it is." I closed my eyes once. I thought about the eastern spine and the Harmon grid. I thought about what happens when infrastructure fails because someone decided the difference between what was built and what was installed was a manageable risk. "Those pipes go under people's houses, Ryan," I said. He hung up. My mother called the next morning. She didn't start with sweetness the way she sometimes does. She started with worry, which in her language is a softer weapon but still a weapon. "Sweetheart," she said, "your brother talked to us. He's upset. Whatever misunderstanding is happening with this work project, I think you should talk to him directly before you take anything to anyone." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said. "You don't always see the full picture," she replied, and her voice had that particular gentleness that means she's decided she's right. "Ryan has been working in this industry for 10 years. He understands how these contracts work." She paused. "You work from home, honey. You look at screens." I sat with that for 3 seconds. "I work from home," I said, "and I found it." Her voice cooled. "I'm asking you not to do something you can't undo." "Someone already did it," I said. "I'm just reading what's there." She went quiet. Then, "If you go forward with this, your father and I—" "Mom," I said quietly. She stopped. "What were you going to say?" I asked. "If I go forward?" "You what? You'll be disappointed? You'll take his side?" I looked at the window. I spent a long time waiting for that to feel surprising. She didn't answer. She never does when I ask the real question. The review process took 2 weeks from submission. Weston's legal and compliance team moved with the quiet precision of people who had been watching for this and simply needed the documentation to act. I presented the analysis in a conference room with 4 people present: Weston's general counsel, a forensic accounting partner, and 2 members of Callaway Meridian's board who had been kept outside the original contract chain, specifically because of the anomalies Weston had already noticed. I pulled up the materials data, the billing records, the procurement structure, and the performance differentials. I walked through it the way I walk through any system failure, not as an accusation, as a map. Here is what the numbers show. Here is what the installation data shows. Here is where those 2 things diverge. Here is what the divergence means for 11 miles of primary water main that will be under residential streets for the next 40 years. Nobody interrupted. Faces change the way they do when something lands. Then I pulled up the approval chain. The general counsel looked at the screen for a long moment. He said one word: depth. I said, 11 miles. All primary distribution. He wrote something down. The forensic accountant wrote something down. The 2 board members exchanged a look that meant they had suspected, and now they knew. Ryan was not in the room. He had been told the meeting was a materials performance debrief. He arrived 20 minutes after we started and walked in to find his project's entire financial and procurement history mapped on a 60-inch screen. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. Then he laughed. It was short and incredulous, and it held nothing funny. "Really?" he said. "You're really doing this?" The general counsel said. "Mr. Callaway, please take a seat." Ryan didn't sit. He looked at the board members. "This is a family dispute being performed as a professional audit," he said. "She has a personal agenda. There's context to every line item on that screen that she's not presenting." The forensic accountant said, quietly, "We've reviewed the context." Ryan's jaw tightened. His eyes came back to me. They were scared. I had never seen him scared before. In 30 years of being his sister, I had watched him be angry, smug, dismissive, charming, and occasionally genuinely funny. I had never seen his face look like that, like something underneath the surface was crumbling while the outside tried to hold its shape. "You're doing this because of the dinner," he said. His voice was low. "Because of one comment." I shook my head. "I'm doing this because 11 miles of undersized pipe is going to fail in 8 years, and the city of people living above it have no idea." His face flushed. "Victor Weston only knows who you are because you got lucky with an email." Gerald Weston, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, looked up. He said, "She got lucky with competence. That's the only kind of luck that matters in a room like this." Ryan looked at him the way you look at someone who just moved a wall you thought was solid. The proceedings that followed didn't happen in one room or one day. They happened in the way institutional consequences always happen slowly, paperwork by paperwork, call by call, with the grinding patience of a system correcting itself. Callaway Meridian's board opened a full internal audit. The city contract authority was notified. A materials remediation assessment was ordered for the affected installation zones. Ryan was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. His attorney called mine. I hadn't had an attorney until that week 3 times in the first 2 days. I didn't take the calls. My father called on a Wednesday evening. His voice sounded like a man trying to stand straight in water that had reached his chest. He said, "I need you to understand what you've done to this family." I said, "I need you to understand what was done to that contract." He said, "You always had to be the one who was right." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "I was always the one who was actually right. That's different." He hung up. My mother called the next day. She didn't say much. She asked if I was eating. I said yes. She said she didn't know what to do with any of this. I said I know. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. And it lasted 4 minutes. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Gerald Weston called me directly. He said the group had an opening for a systems integrity director, overseeing data quality and performance monitoring across their full portfolio of infrastructure contracts. He described it carefully: the scope, the team, the budget. The salary figure he named would have made my mother's friends describe me as successful in a voice that sounded different from the one they use now. I listened to all of it. I thanked him for saying it. Then I said no. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked why. I looked at my monitors. The pressure anomaly I'd been tracking 2 states over had finally shown its pattern that morning. A flow restriction in the secondary feed, consistent with partial valve failure, fixable with a targeted pressure adjustment before the weekend demand peak. I'd written up the report and sent it an hour ago. Somewhere, water was going to keep running. Because I'm good at this from here, I said. Because the work is what matters, not the title. And because I've spent a long time trying to fit inside other people's definitions of what I should be, and I'm done with that. Gerald Weston was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "Fair enough. Independent contract instead?" "Yes," I said. "That I'll do. I don't drive past that dinner venue the way some people drive past places where their lives changed. But I do pass the Harmon grid report. Sometimes it sits in an old folder on my desktop. Dated February, 4 years ago, 5:47 a.m. I open it occasionally, not to feel proud, to remember that what you know, and what you build, and what you quietly fix at 2 in the morning, when no one is watching, that doesn't stop being real just because no one has seen it yet. My brother is working through the legal process. It moves slowly and without drama. My parents have called 3 times since the board meeting. The conversations are shorter now and more careful, like they're both learning how to speak to me without the assumption that I owe them a softer version of what I know. Last week, my mother asked what I was working on, not as small talk. As a real question, I told her about the valve issue in the secondary feed, about how pressure systems communicate in patterns if you know how to listen, about how an entire city's water can hinge on a reading most people never think about. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you know how to see that?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "I just always have." She didn't say much after that, but she didn't change the subject either. She just stayed on the line for a while, and I let her. There's a thing people do when they're used to underestimating you. When the evidence finally arrives, they want to reframe it as luck or timing or the right connection at the right moment. They want there to be something circumstantial about it, some external variable that explains why the person they wrote off suddenly mattered. Because if it was circumstance, then their judgment wasn't wrong. They were just unlucky. It wasn't circumstance. It was 4 years of overnight shifts and cold coffee, and the kind of focus that looks like nothing from the outside. It was a model built on a personal laptop at 2 in the morning because the problem was real and no one else was reading it. What people call the quiet one is usually just the one who stopped explaining themselves to an audience that wasn't listening. I stopped explaining a long time ago. I just kept working. The work, it turns out, explains itself.